Bon, bonjour à tous. Oups, c'est un peu fort. Donc nous sommes très heureux d'accueillir Josep Ricart, qui est architecte associé et fondateur de l'agence Architectes, basée à Barcelone et fondée en 2000. Alors avant de laisser la parole à Josep, je voudrais rapidement faire une petite introduction sur l'histoire donc, de cette petite agence et qui est intimement liée avec l'histoire récente de l'Espagne et la crise que traverse ce pays depuis 10 ans. Donc voilà, donc au moment où l'intitulé de ces leçons du mardi a été décidé, on a rapidement pensé à se tourner vers l'Espagne, qui traverse une zone de turbulence assez forte depuis une décennie. Et de là a émergé une architecture assez créative et très frugale, on va dire, qui a été remarquée notamment à la Biennale de Venise 2016 et où Architectes était présent dans le pavillon espagnol, représenté au pavillon espagnol. Et donc voilà, donc on s'est tourné naturellement vers Architectes, puisqu'il est très intéressant de suivre leur parcours qui a su acquérir une reconnaissance internationale en pleine période de récession du pays. Tout juste diplômés de l'école d'architecture de l'Université Polytechnique de Catalogne, les 4 associés fondent leur agence en 2000. L'Espagne est alors en pleine euphorie immobilière, laissant depuis les années 90 se développer une bulle spéculative. Et lors de la crise bancaire et financière de 2007 et 2008, l'explosion de cette bulle plonge le pays dans une crise sociale et économique dramatique. Les licenciements dans le secteur de la construction se comptent en centaines de milliers, et rien qu'en Catalogne, le nombre de projets immobiliers chute de près de 50% sur l'année 2008. À cette période, Architectes est en train de concevoir la maison 712, dont les clients voient leur budget diminuer de près de 65%. Il en résultera une architecture de briques, économe et dénudée de tout élément superflu. Une architecture emblématique de la crise dans laquelle s'enfonce le pays alors. En 2011, le taux de chômage avoisine les 25% en Espagne et plus d'un jeune sur 2 se retrouve sans emploi. Architectes livre alors une résidence étudiante dans l'université de Paris-Est à côté de Barcelone, là où ils ont étudié. C'est cette architecture modulaire qui fera connaître l'agence. Depuis, les politiques d'austérité se sont succédées et ont profondément transformé le paysage politique espagnol, avec notamment l'ascension de Podemos. Quant à Architectes, ils ont poursuivi un travail ambitieux et rigoureux, en portant une grande attention au système énergétique de leurs bâtiments. Malgré les nombreux prix et la reconnaissance internationale qu'ils ont acquise, l'ensemble de leurs projets se situe à moins de 50 km de leur bureau. Alors, je viens d'apprendre ce matin que c'est plus tout à fait vrai, puisqu'ils ont une proposition pour travailler à Berlin. Donc ça s'éloigne un petit peu. Mais voilà, donc nous pourrons notamment citer le centre de recherche ICTA, livré en 2014, dont Josep va nous parler, et les centres civiques de Cristalerías et de Lealtat, livrés en 2016 et 2018, qui sont particulièrement intéressants. Donc Josep va parler en anglais. Ensuite, la discussion donc, va se poursuivre pendant une vingtaine de minutes. Vous pourrez poser vos questions en anglais ou en espagnol, selon vos affinités linguistiques. So, Josep, thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm sorry for my French. It sounds really English. It's what I'm able to speak. I hope, well, I'm really not really fluent in English, but I hope that the images will be enough to explain the basic concepts, okay? I always begin my explanation with this picture. This is a picture that it was a present from a student that I used to have in the architectural school, and I use it as a certain description about how is our office and how are Architectes. We are 4 partners, and we met each other at the school, like you are now, not at the end of my studies, but at the beginning. We were friends at the beginning of the career. And to work 4 people as a team, I'm sure that is also difficult for you. I'm sorry, there's some... It's okay? Some sounds, okay. I suppose that is difficult for everybody, but the only way for us to deal with the idea to work as a team is to have what we call common places. Concepts that we share, and that we share from the very beginning of the work together. One of that common places is what you can see in the right part of the slide, which is that kind of popular construction without language, very typical in the countryside in Catalonia. It's a construction that is just designed for a purpose. In this case, an agricultural program. Nothing else, but nothing more. This is easy to share at the beginning of a career, working as a team, because it has no language. And this is something important. The only way to work as a team is to avoid any idea of personal desires in the table of discussion. You cannot share what I want, and I will not share with you what you want. But we can share some kind of common places that are objective enough, anonymous enough. With the times, with the years, we've discovered that what we really appreciate of that kind of construction was not only the lack of language, but was also the efficiency in terms of program and use. And this idea of efficiency, which is about sustainability, we've discovered that is also something that exists not only in what happened years ago, like in vernacular. There's also a kind of contemporary vernacular, like in the left side of the slide, that has the same characteristics, which is very efficient, just for a purpose, anonymous, lack of language, and so on. Well, that's a little bit to introduce that we are a team, that we are for people, and a common place that has begun a specificity of the office. In Spain, well, in Catalonia, I don't know how well known we are, but in the level that we are known, or we used to be known in Barcelona, is as an office well positioned in terms of sustainability. That our approach to architecture was known as an office who deals with sustainability and so on. I agree about that, but I think that we are not concerned about sustainability because we introduce in our approach the idea of life cycling or low-embodied energy materials, that we do, or that we use passive strategies to gain, or active strategies, that we do. I think that our interest in sustainability is based not in these topics, which are obviously necessary in that kind of approaching, but we are concerned about sustainability because we understand architecture about support for living. The use of the architecture is the first strategy in terms of sustainability. It's not the object itself. The objects are sustainable or unsustainable, not because of the object itself, but because the use that we get from the object. Okay? So, this is what we are concerned, how we use architecture. And this is why we are concerned about sustainability. Because an object can become very sustainable if you use it in a larger period of time, or if it's used by a lot of people, or if it's used in a second life. So these are three examples about why sustainability is not about the objects, but about how we use the objects. And how we use architecture. What's the name that we give to the use of architecture? The buildings give us conditions for living. So we have to accept, I don't know if this is a common idea, or maybe you don't share that idea, but our idea is that what is outside, the architecture which is outside, at least in terms of sustainability, in terms of the crisis of resources that have our world nowadays, are an absolute disaster. 99% of the heritage that we've received and the heritage that we're going to give to the future generations, in terms of sustainability, are not working, okay? And this is not about how it is in terms of design. It's about how we design it in terms of use. And the word for that is habitability. The buildings, construction, give us conditions for living. So if in terms of sustainability it doesn't work, we have to change what we have understood till now, what is habitability, how we live, how we use the buildings, okay? So what I'm talking about is that habitability, at least in Spain, I don't know in France, is at least in general for the professionals, are a word that sounds really bad. But because after habitability, there's another name, which is norm. There's lots of laws in Spain that are about habitability. What does it mean? That we have transformed a beautiful world, sorry, which talks about conditions for living, into a fixed word which talks about laws. Don't do that, don't do that, do that, just order, just a prejudice about what means to live. So what we need is an architecture who changes that approach, who talks about living in a positive way, who change topics, who say goodbye to that topical family, okay? What we have to answer, what we have to question ourselves, we have to question something as simple, but at the same time so difficult to question, about privacy versus property. Limits versus property. Jackson Delat says that we have to question ourselves also the clothes that we are using. We have to question everything, even the clothes, to change that idea of topic and prejudiced way of living. Of course, it's not our idea. We have lots of examples. Architecture that has understood that the object of what we are doing is not the object itself, is what happens into our object. Life as a final challenge, not architecture itself as a challenge. Or the flexible idea of users instead of the dictatorship of the architecture saying what you have to use, or how you have to use a space. Or the idea of luxury in terms of volume, in terms of space, and not in terms of cost. Okay, so all those examples, I think that they are questioning that topics about habitability. And of course they are talking again about sustainability, but this is just a consequence. What is interesting is that we have to question ourselves about how we live our buildings. So I've shown you this picture in the left side, which is from Jackson Delat again. And when I explain what we do at the office, I use a Jackson Delat concept, which is that we try to offer a large number of spaces which are specific in terms of conditions, not in terms of use. So houses or public buildings that offers different kind of spaces, but not specialized spaces. Special, but not specialized. The difference is incredible. There's a sentence from Delat which said something like, function compromise freedom of use. Okay? So two classical topics of modern architecture, functionalism, no? Something, the idea of program as a strategy to design, from Delat is against freedom in the use of the spaces. What does it mean at the end? That when a space just is useful in a certain way, it becomes impossible to be used in different ways. So freedom disappears when function grows up, and the opposite. So we prefer to offer a catalog of spaces which are very special, but not clearly specialized. Okay? That are special because material, because conditions, but not because the function. That can be changed, that can be mixed, that you can remember, but not because what you have done in certain moment in that space. Well, all this is, so at the end we are designing the support for living. but the complete process just ends when the user, when people colonize our architecture. So this is something that we have very clear at the office, that project includes people living in our projects. And that idea of colonization, of occupation, begins during the design process. This is something that happened in our office in all the projects, that in certain moments, maybe in 3-4 times during the design process, huge models, 120 scale models, shows up, and in joining the customers, joining the commissioners, we try to begin to decide which gonna be the strategy of occupation, which is not only up to us, is also up to the clients to decide how we can colonize that kind of basic structures that are just designed to give conditions for living. But the life itself needs the complicity, the friendship, the collaboration with the client. Because at the end, life, the real life, is not what we decide here or what you're gonna decide in your future offices or anywhere you are. The real life is what happens with that people placing their own life into our supports. We are just designing, we are projecting what people are gonna do. We just are able to design the conditions for that people, and in fact, we just can take decisions in terms of geometry and material, nothing else. In paper, in your laptops, you're not able to decide nothing else than material and geometry. So without that part, including that part in your strategies, the complete sense of, not of project, of architecture is impossible. Well, I used to do that introduction because in general, people, when we present our projects, it sounds too like descriptions, because we don't explain, when we present our projects, we don't explain genial ideas. We just try to explain how the building works. And in general, this is really boring. So we try to, at the beginning at least, explain certain general ideas that sounds like, in terms of concepts and intellectually, a little bit more important. But from now to the rest of the presentation, I will just describe some projects, okay? I will try to describe the projects through using four strategies that cannot be explained separately. In fact, in every project, the four strategies cross and shows up in different levels of intensity, but I think that I have 4 ideas, more than 4 strategies, and I can explain those ideas through a group of projects. Fluid matter. To explain that, I use that drawing, that diagram. This diagram is done by my partner Roger during his PhD research, an incomplete PhD. The 4 partners, we have an incomplete PhD. This diagram is a diagram that Roger did. Is based in a real house. Okay, it's a house that we did in the office, 100 square meters house, really small. And for his PhD, one day he decided to do the calculation of the heaviness, how heavy was the house. Okay, so he was really rigorous. Okay, so all the massive part is the dark gray on the left. The liquid part is the second gray, and the gaseous part of the house is the lighter gray. Okay, this is the heaviness of 100 square meters house, done by 8 architects. The difference with the second diagram is the same house, doing the same calculation, but not for an instant, but for 1 year. Same house for 1 year, suddenly the proportion change. In Spanish, we say like a socks. When you take off your socks, and you put it the opposite. So it's completely the opposite. What does it mean? Obviously, the massive part of the house, the weight is the same, but it hasn't changed. It's the same objective and the same weight. But during 1 year, the liquid part has renovated several times. And of course, the gaseous part of the house is changing in between 4 and 8 or 11 times per hour. So, and this is for true, this is real. Of course, is just a diagram, but it shows perfectly one idea. What explains that? First of all, the big difference between architecture and a sculpture is time. That's the big difference. We're not lack of time. Architecture is about time. And that difference is huge, it's enormous. Because the challenge of a sculpture, the challenge of certain art, is to be a part of the time. But for architecture, time is basic. Is the genesis of architecture, to understand that it's impossible without taking care about what means time in architecture. And the second is that the air is far more important than we thought, because the air is the media between the conditions that we have designed and the real perception for the real living. You know what I mean? The air is something that we don't see. That's why we have decided during the last 50 years to give to the engineers the responsibility to give conditions to the air through machines, through halls, through all that stuff that we don't control as the designers. Because as we don't see the air, we don't take care about how give qualities to the air. But the air is important. The air is important. And we're not talking about something new. We are talking to recover for the architectural responsibility something that happened during the 20 centuries before, that through construction, we qualifies the air. It's been during the last 50 years that the engineering has decided that they were smart enough, but because we have decided as architects and as a society, as the air is something that we don't see, and what we don't see is not important nowadays, because we just get information through our eyes, we have decided that this air that we don't see can be solved by someone which are not the architects, and with machines that cannot be seen because are hidden in the ceilings, in the roof tubes, and so on and so on. Okay? So that's the two conclusions on of this diagram. To explain that idea that how important is the air and how important is the time, I will explain you a couple of projects. Okay? The first of the projects is this, the Cristalleria Esplanell. This is a adult, is an academic school for adult people. Okay? Is a public building, very small, placed in the center of Barcelona in a terrible plot, because it's that difficult geometry, a narrow triangle that belongs to an old huge factory, but the factory was like 10 times bigger than that final plot that has led here between that new streets. Okay. To explain deeply that idea of how to give conditions to the air, just explain you the basic strategy of the building. The competition, this was a competition in 2010, and our strategy in the competition was very simple. There were just two conditions, that the plot was a triangle, the program of course, and that you have to take care of an old facade that were a part of heritage, okay? This old facade of the factory. That is just the facade, but that covers 2 of the 3 facades of the plot, so it's difficult to deal with that. Why is so difficult? Because as basically the program of the building is classrooms, and the classrooms need natural light, and the natural light, when the old facade that covers the main facade, which is the south side, is with the holes that belongs to a factory with an industrial logic, it's very difficult to mix with the needs of classrooms. Okay, so that's why we did the basic strategy of the building, which was to do 2 steps behind, okay, and let a patio in between the old facade and the new classrooms. Okay, this patio was just to get more light, more natural light from the ceiling, and also to mix the 2 kind of halls that were on the old facade. So after that, we decided that the patio will be transformed into an atrium. Okay, the difference between the patio and the atrium is that the atrium is a natural system to, in winter time, as we have a lot of internal heat, because adult people in small classrooms, you know how can be, no? In terms of heat and also in terms of smell, but this is a natural heating. You are natural heaters, so the winter strategy is to be very close and to have the fresh air from this atrium that is like a greenhouse that keeps the air a little bit warmer. Okay, in summertime is the opposite. You have to move a lot of air because the internal heaters have to be avoided and has to be take off of the building. Okay, so basically the strategy of the building, you will see that the shape and the geometry is very Euclidean, but in fact is to give shape to the to give qualities to the air, qualities in terms of movement, of direction, of temperature and humidity, okay, and also natural light. So time, as I was talking before, how important is the time, can be explained in 4 parameters. Time as use, no, 4 vectors, sorry, has to be serious in front of engineers. 4 vectors, time as use. The idea of use is impossible without time, okay? We use buildings, we don't use sculptures. Well, not all the schools. You know the sentence from Dalí about a sculpture of, well, at least a sculpture cannot be moving. That was Dalí's. Calder, you know Calder, the sculptures from Calder that moves? Dalí sent him a letter saying, please don't let your sculptures move. At least what you can ask to a sculpture is don't move. So, because sculpture is not about time, but buildings are about time. Okay, so what is the use in this case? The use is about flexibility in terms of future. This is a public building. During the process from the competition to the final project, the use changed. At the beginning wasn't a school for adults. So our basic strategy here was to develop a public building, not an adult school or so on, a public building that can be transformed in the future. That's why we just put the structure in one sense, not in the other. Well, to put just a middle corridor, which is the easiest way to have access to the maximum number of programs and so on. So the building is basically that pattern of administrative part and classrooms. So it's repeated every floor. Well, this is not really important, but time is about use. In this case, was important to make understand all the users that they were not the important part of that building, because this is a public building for everybody, not only for the specific users that will be here during certain years, just 10 years maybe, but this is a very heavy building that will be here maybe for 100 years. Second acception, second vector for time is the obvious one, is time as memory. But so, of course, when you talk about time, and in a case like that, which is dealing about heritage, something from the past and so on, you have to talk about memory. But for us, to talk about heritage, something that is already there, is not to talk in terms of culture. It's not to talk about composition or cultural values or historic values. Is to understand how useful is already this material. You have to understand, you have to do the calculation necessary to understand and to get if this old wall is still able to support something. If the wideness of the wall gives us something in terms of inertia, something in terms of humidity control. Okay, so that's our position, our approaching to heritage. Of course that we also have an approach in terms of culture, but the first and obvious is to understand that in terms of embodied energy, this is an energy embodied in that material that can be used again. So we have to understand this is not as a cultural example, but as a structural wall. So what we did in this case was to see if the wall was still able to support another floor, how wide it is, and how will help us to that patio to give inertia and to control humidity, how were the halls in terms of natural light, and so on and so on. So we are using here the wall not as a sculpture, but as a part of this patio that is the basic strategy in terms of thermodynamics of and comfort of the building. Working as a greenhouse, working as a mass, and also as a structure. Time is performing. Time is about performing. And this is difficult to explain, but for us is the basic and the most interesting part of that kind of strategy. So the structure not only performs supporting. The structure, in this case, perform giving shape. This is a structural walls. This is something very uncommon also in Spain. I suppose that in France it's very uncommon, especially in a public building of 4th floors. Okay, it's not really common, neither in Spain. But this is a very good strategy to, thanks to the structure, at the same time that you're supporting slabs, that you're supporting program, you're giving shape to the spaces, but in this case, you're giving shape to the air of the patio, but not only of the patio. Also the structure decides that geometry to prepare, to allow the pipes for the air that go to the roof and to come from the basement, and so on and so on. But also the structure, because it's a massive wall, as used to be the old factory, is giving inertia, it's giving conditions, it's qualifying the air, okay? Inertia is that incredible invention that assumes the excess of heat and give it back when it's necessary, okay? But it's the same in terms of humidity if the product that you're using has porous, like wood, like bricks without any kind of coating, and so on. But also the structure can perform giving shape to the pipes, to the installations, and also giving inertia in the slabs and so on. Because when you're talking about that kind of thermodynamical strategies, when you are using massive walls to control the comfort, you have to assume that you cannot coat, that you cannot hide that kind of walls. So the installation is going to be seen, something that is not happening here. All the installations are hidden, isn't it? So are about the ceilings, the roofs, and so on. In that kind of buildings where all the mass helps to control the comfort, then the installations cannot be hidden. But then you have to assume that as an architect, as a designer, you have to design the shape, the aspect, the look of the installations. And this is something that I have to say to you that is impossible. Forget to try to control all that. What you can try is to give patterns, to give instructions. That's why we did that kind of bizarre slab, because that shape hide in a visual light, in a visual condition. You see the classroom and the basic pipes get a little bit hidden, but gives clear instruction to the installer. We gave them just instruction about on the first corridor is for that kind of pipes, the second is for that kind of installation, and the third, and so on. So instead of giving final shapes, we gave them like a pattern and instructions, like a game. It works pretty well. Okay, so that's the basic perform of the building. Okay, the air comes from the basement in a very, this is about, let's take it very slow. Okay, it's a slow air. It's like a slow food. It's like everything has to be slow. You know how we are the Spanish, isn't it? So take it easy. Okay, it's a take it easier system. does it mean that when you work not with pipes, but with the spaces as the way of the movement of the air, you don't have the feeling of movement, okay? Which is far more comfortable than to have the feeling of a rush of air from a pipe. You know what I mean? Okay, so this is about windows, not about holes. This is about the space, not about pipes. Okay, so the air moves from one space to the other, always getting from the inertia of the concrete walls on the basement or the old walls, or all the structural walls, getting conditions in terms of temperature and humidity. Of course, with that passive system is not enough. In certain days of the winter and in certain days of the summer, just with the pure inertia, it's not enough. So the pavement is an active pavement based on geothermal energy that gives the point of heat in winter and gives also the point of cold, of warm in summer, okay? And I don't know the name, but the extra point in this case was not only to give conditions without air conditioning systems, was also to avoid the engines just to move the air. You have to, there's a difference between to move the air to give heat or cold than in front of just move the air in terms of healthiness, okay? Because smell, because of CO2. It's two different movements. Here we decided from the really beginning that we weren't gonna use any kind of machines to give conditions to the air. But at the end we decided also that to move the air, we won't use engines, fans. That's why we developed that strange hats, that strange roof, which is not only a bizarre roof. This is a sun chimney that is the natural engine that moves 15,000 meters, no, 3 meters, cubic meters per hour. That means that we are moving in summertime the same than an HVAC system. 15, so that means between 9 and 11 times per hour, all the air of the classrooms is in movement, just with a natural engine. This is a complete natural engine based on 3 different systems. This is the south patio, the south atrium. This is the CFD simulations that we did to check if it would work. So this is based in 3 natural engines. The sun chimney, which is a physical, very easy concept to understand. If you come into YouTube, you will see very simple, funny inventions to do sun chimneys with your sons. Do you have sons? No, I have sons. So, and it's very simple as a concept. Which is very difficult is to check if it's possible to move 11 times per hour all the air. The concept is up to the architects. It's possible to, because the concept is very funny. I want to move a lot of air in summer. But in winter, what I want is to keep you warm inside of the classroom. So in winter, I just want to move the minimum possible. So the sun chimney is a perfect invention because in summer is when it works, when it gets really hot and the depression is incredibly strong and moves lots of air. But in winter, less sun, the sun goes lower. So in winter, the sun chimney works like a sheet, but that's perfect for the project because in winter I want you warm into the classroom, okay? So as a concept, come from the architects, but as a simulation, as a calculation, as a process, came from the engineers. Not all the engineers are like demons. There are fantastic engineers that want to recover for architecture, for natural comfort, tools that traditionally for them are being solved by machines. Well, the second natural engine is the chimney effect, just because of the vertical part of the chimney. And the third natural effect is the Venturi effect, which is a very well-known physical effect that is necessary because in summer nights I need the sun chimney working. So I need a minimum of movement during the night to take off all the heat that keeps into the inertia. Well, I'm sorry, I'm taking too much time to explain all that engineering details. Let me explain another one. This is also based on to give conditions to the air, but based in a complete different strategy. In the previous one was to invent the courtyard and all the spaces for the movement of the air. In this case, which was an old building, an old, we call that cooperative, cooperatives? But workers' cooperatives. This is from the 20s, when workers come together to have a common space where they get some theater or some meetings. And also the specific point in Barcelona was that kind of cooperatives, they come together for something so basic as to get some food from places that were difficult in personal to get some food. So they put together the money to come and buy potatoes in the other part of Spain and so on. So this kind of buildings has two clear parts: a shop, a common shop for all the partners of the cooperative, and the cultural part. Okay, so this is a competition that we won in 2001, the Lleialtats en Senca, and the strategy is again about the air, but in this case is about how to demolish strategically part of the building. Not all the building was protected by the catalog of the city, just the facade. We won the competition because we were the team who keeps there mostly all the old building. But we demolished, we tried, as I was talking before about that our approach to heritage is not about in terms of culture, it's about in terms of performing. How can steel work in terms of structure? How can steel work in terms of thermodynamics and so on? So what we discover here is that part of the structure, part of the spaces, of the original spaces, are less useful than others. So we demolish this part, trying to create like a street into the building. But it's not a street, it's again an invention that performs in terms of passive strategies, okay? Again, qualifying the air in terms of natural ventilation, cross ventilation, temperature, gains of the sun, and so on. So this is a drawing from the competition explaining how we keep part of the building and how we demolish part of the building, giving new conditions, keeping the old conditions for the spaces that are still useful, and getting new conditions with this new street that cross the building, okay? That works like a greenhouse and so on. Well, so we get that part for the non-program, for the unexpected, but that is very clear in terms of passive, because it's a natural engine that moves the air to the top, give fresh air to the whole building. But in terms of program, is the unexpected, assuming a new way to put in order all the circulations of the building. So thanks to that new way of circulations, the old parts that we keep there get more clean, because the circulations are out of the old parts, are assumed by this new street. Okay, it's the picture. I'm sorry, it's better in my screen. It's a little bit dark, but it's fun. It's nice. If you come to Barcelona, you're invited, because this is the demonstration about urbanism is about from bottom to the top. When a building, it's a real complaint from real people. When it's 40 years of people asking to recover that building for society, then the success is for sure. When it doesn't matter how necessary is the program or how necessary is to do the rehabilitation of an heritage, if the decision comes from the top to down, it never works. This is an example of success. 6 months after the opening, it's full of people acting, performing, playing music, doing exhibitions. It's amazing. It's managed by by the neighbors. They've developed a group of management. They present to themselves to the competition to decide who's gonna manage that public building, and they won. And it's so you invite because it's an open building. That's the ceiling and so on. Well, that's the old part. What we keep there, just trying to take advantage of the original conditions. So that's the opposite a little bit. In one side, new conditions for the air, thanks to the strategic demolish, and on the other side, to take advantage from the original conditions of that kind of walls, again, inertia, and so on. To assume it's a very old-fashioned structure that is, we've done the calculation. We have assumed the risk to say that the old structure can stand up with certain new structural parts, but it's basically the original structure standing up the new program. Okay, that was the first strategy. Second one, and which gives the title to the presentation, from elemental to fundamental. What does it mean? This is not our stuff. This is, for me, my favorite building in Barcelona. If you never came to visit us, I give you that advice, which is to visit this, which is the library at the UPF University. It's also an open building. You can visit anytime you went there. It's a very old building, just an infrastructure to keep water well, it's like it's an infrastructure, okay? Now it's a library. Well, I don't want to explain it very much, but library of the UPF University, close to the Ciutadellas Park. It's an amazing building, okay? It's that mix between an old brick infrastructure with that new lecture done by Clotet Paricio, which are a pair of very good architects. Why I present that image? To explain that idea of what means this that I talked, what I call from elemental to fundamental. I don't know any designer, it doesn't matter if it's an industrial designer or an architect or an engineer, I don't know any designer who doesn't assume that in a design process you have to assume as many as inputs as possible, all the demands possible and all the availables possible. What does it mean? That at the beginning of a design process, you assume, you try to understand, you try to put together what the customer is asking to you, the program, the norms, no? The laws, the budget, the conditions of the soil, the conditions of the climate. You also try to understand all the availabilities, the resources, the advantages, the opportunities, isn't it? This is what we try as designers, to do that very complex process, strategical process, where you put together all the demands and all the availabilities and try to discover, to figure out what strategy can put all together and solve the demands, okay? What we try to do, or what I think is a very common step, a very common strategy in all our projects, is, assuming all that, try to give the answers. I don't like the answer concept, but let's say like that. Try to give the answers using just the basic parts of construction. In construction, there are just two parts, just two. Structure, which is the part of the buildings which supports the program, and enclosure, which is the protection for the program in front of the environment. Okay? There's nothing else. Support and protection. Nothing else. What we try is taking these elemental parts of the buildings, asking them to perform as maximum number of behaviors possible. So, if the structure can perform not only as a structure, but also as the geometry of the space, fine. If it's not only the geometry of the space, but it's also the inertia that gives conditions in terms of temperature, better. If it's also made based on a product that has in its nature in the nature of the brick, there's the chance to work in terms of structure, in terms of geometry, in terms of inertia, in terms of humidity control. Everything is in the brick, or in the wood, or in the stone. We were talking about Gilles Perrodin, isn't it? So then the elemental becomes fundamental, because it's just not the structure. It's the structure, it's the space, is all the conditions of the space. Okay? So the same, this is the structure, but you also need the enclosure, you also need the protection. So let's ask the protection the same. Then if we ask these both basic parts to perform in all that, with all that ambition, well, that's the concept, okay? So to explain that, I will explain you also, I think is one project. This is a research center that we did very close to the office. We're really local, so we try to work not far away of the office, so we are so lazy, and we hate to sleep away from home, and it's terrible. Well, it's not for that. It's because we are sick of control. We are sick of control. So it's a sickness. So maybe during the short meal we were talking about Lacaton Basal. No? They are not sick of control. We love Lacaton Basal. In fact, this is a copy. But this is a perfect copy, maybe too much perfect. This is like, it works. Everything works here. It's not as beautiful as Lacaton Basal. Our position, we would like to be like them, but we are not. So we are sick of control. And the control needs to be very close to the building process. We control everything. This is something that is specific from Spain, okay? In Spain, you get the degree in the university, and with that degree, you're able to act as an architect. And the architect in Spain doesn't exist, the figure, the character of the civil engineer. Doesn't exist. The engineers are not the responsibles of the construction process, are the architects. So the responsibility for the university is huge. With the degree, you can perform as architect. You can sing something like that. So that's why our studies in Spain are so professionalistic. Professionalistic sounds all right? Okay, because just with that degree, you can do something good or bad like that, okay? So just to explain that idea from elemental to fundamental, and that clear parts of basic construction, which is structure and enclosure. So this research center, as I told you, it's very close to our office. Basically, it's very simple to explain. It's a building inside a greenhouse. It's not a building with a greenhouse. It's a building inside a greenhouse. The enclosure, the protection, the coating, the whole envelopment is a greenhouse system, a catalog system from a catalog built by people who build greenhouses, okay? But with me and my partners over them to do it very, very perfect, okay? And in the inside is just a concrete structure. So basically, all the building works in a passive way. The whole building works in a passive way, so all the intermediate spaces, which are meeting spaces, free program spaces, are just passive climate design. That means that there's lots of people, how you call that, secretary people, administrative people who works here, really hates us. Because to go to the bathroom, sometimes they get, it's not as warm as should be. But we assume that we are not the kind of architects that, it's impossible to give all the level of comfort that people is waiting for. It's impossible. So we have to assume that there's some uncomfortable moments, not spaces. There are moments of uncomfortability. Well, all the parts that needs an extra of comfort are the no dynamic spaces, which are into the boxes of wood that have a level more of comfort with active systems. So the strategy is again very simple in terms of thermodynamics. Okay, in winter, the greenhouse has to be very close and works as a greenhouse, getting gain of the sun from any of the facades. So through CFD simulations and with natural engines like is the roof and the corridors and the basement, we move the air in a natural strategy to take the air from the hot facade and put it in the colder spaces. Okay, this is very natural. The air by itself tried to compensate that, so it's not really difficult. So in winter is a greenhouse working as a greenhouse. In summer is the opposite. It's like a porch. It's like a shadow. The whole greenhouse open with an industrial system, but repeated in every meter to open the whole facade and to move as much as possible air. Okay. So the two parts are clear. Okay, the structure and the enclosure. The structure here is something forever. It's based on concrete. It will be here for ages. You have to assume, because concrete is something that you know that in terms of environment, it's not good. A lot of CO2 in the process, okay? Really heavy. But like the old car that I showed you, the Chevy that I showed you, the first picture, the big car in La Habana, it's as unsustainable as the concrete. But it's been in La Habana for 70 years. So every year, it's getting less and less and less unsustainable. So it's the same for concrete. If you assume that you have the concrete, what you have to ask the concrete is to perform to be the superstructure. It has to be there for everything. So it's not just the structure. Lots of inertia, okay? A 40 centimeters slab. But as it's a 40 centimeters slab, it's too heavy. So we put that kind of pipes inside, which are pipes that takes off some heaviness, and at the same time, through these pipes, we can take off the heat, not only on the surface, but also inside. And at the same time, the fresh air, if it's not enough opening the windows, the fresh air also moves through these pipes and go to all the offices. And at the same time, with the shape of the surface, you have better acoustic conditions. And everything is in the structure, in the important part of the building, okay? So also the active system, the pavement is also active, and the slab is also activated with heat water and cold water, with hot water and cold water. That's the pipes that are inside the concrete. That's the cheap way to give shape to the concrete, because it's a very basic structure, very cheap concrete structure. Full of, we're asking to perform in a lot of ways. So that was the super exciting moment in the process. That was like to be in a futuristic movie. Every day, people taking sizes to put the post-10 system in its place, the pipes. You cannot see here all the pipes for the heating system, for the cold system. Well, it was beautiful. It's an amazing moment. For the structural part, suddenly something which is just a concrete structure that is hidden, I don't know where, suddenly becomes everything. Okay, giving conditions to this space. This intermediate space, the quality of the air is based on the qualities that the structure gives to the air, in terms of active and passive, acoustics, everything. The second part is the enclosure, the greenhouse system, which is that skin that surrounds all the section. Okay, I insist, catalog system, but reviewed. Okay, because it's not very common in the greenhouses to have the same window system one over each other. But it's as simple as just to repeat it. The greenhouse culture is amazing because agricultural is not about thousands or millions of euros. Agricultural is to take advantage of 1 cent per hectare. It's like, so they have to be very smart. They've shown that they are smarter than the rest of the people. The greenhouse systems from 20 years ago, they already have domotic systems, very cheap domotic system, to close in case of rain, to open in case of temperature, and so on. Already now it's difficult to get that kind of windows as a building product, which is very cheap and very affordable in the agricultural world. Well, solid matter. At the very beginning of another common place when we were young was that interest about that kind of architecture that identifies, that make the same between a structure and geometry. We call that structural space, okay? But this is as clear and as classic as all the architecture based on structural walls, okay? And a structural wall is a very nice example about how the structure is the same as the space. This is a picture from a quarry in Mallorca Island. This is the kind of a stone that Gilles Perrodin used. It's the same kind, very, very similar to that part of the south of France. And so Mallorca Islands, also the south of Italy, has that kind of sandy stone, very easy to be cut. And this is like to be into a beautiful, this is a real quarry working on. So beautiful space. It's an example about that interest, about how the structure gives shape to the space. We were very interested about that, but it doesn't mean to solve all the structures with bricks. It means to solve the structures with the structural bidimensional elements. This is a case of a house that we did like 10 years ago in an impossible plot. It's like a very, very sloppy plot, okay? It's better to do a ski station than a house there. I always gave that advice to them, but they didn't take any care, but they prefer the house. So, but it was impossible to build into the house, absolutely impossible. The house was to be built, it only was possible to be built from the road in the top part of the plot with a grua, but you know what I mean. So, at the same time, we were interested in that idea of the architecture that makes the same between a structure and space. So we were interested about that architecture based in structural walls. But the structural walls here is impossible. We're impossible to do foundation. We're impossible to just to get the flat part of the plot enough to put foundations there. So here is where we discovered the program is as like this. But thanks to that product that we discovered at that moment, that is far better known in France than in Spain, but by that moment, 10 years ago, it was really hardly known in Spain, which is the CLT panels, okay? Timber panels, okay? Structural laminated panels. So we did that house from the top. So what I put it as an example that we're interested on that strategy, but that strategy is not about one material. It's about that concept to identify structure and geometry. So it can be done with wood, but with certain product. This is the second example. This is made on brick. This is a commission that we get at the very beginning of the economic crisis by 2007. Okay, so like 10 years ago. Typical pair, we thought both of them with nice jobs, no sons, with a flat in property, happy. that they get that new plot to build their first house. Okay, they had an apartment and they want a new house. So it's supposed that what happens here is that they ask us not for the house that they need, but for the house that about the family that they want to become. This is very common. People don't ask what they really need. People ask what they imagine that they will need. One day, just based on real interviews, the average in Barcelona, like 7 years ago, it was like this. 95% of the offer in terms of housing is three rooms apartment, 5 pieces apartments. So very typical. Just the 52% of the families in Barcelona are common like that. The rest are single people, pairs without childs, people with 3 wives. So nobody is normal, but everybody is asking to be normal. So that's bizarre, again, how we are as society. So they are asking us for the house on the left side, with something which is really bizarre, a bedroom for the mother-in-law, something that I really don't understand. Who wants a bedroom for your mother-in-law? But they want a bedroom for the mother-in-law, for the kids that they didn't have, 2 cars, they didn't have 2 cars, swimming pool, and so on and so on. So that was the house, the first house, by 3,200. No, well, you see the number. 320,000. Okay, the cost. During the process, we discovered that we are doing too much. The house is getting too big. So we proposed them to do something smaller, something more simple, something easier, and the budget decreased 30%. Okay, so 230,000, less complex, just 1 floor, assuming that the shape of the plot is a triangle and so on. We finished the project, we get the constructor, and they went to the bank to ask for the loan, for the mortgage, okay? And the bank in 2008, 2009 said no. It was a big surprise, okay? They get totally stunned, okay? Because they get a flat, and they had a flat in property. They had jobs. There was no problem in terms of economic, but we were in the middle of the crisis. So the bank decided to don't let money to nobody. The bank said them that they're gonna let them the half of the price, not 2030, but 140, in fact 125 or 135, sorry, okay? They came to the office, they said that was impossible to the house, everybody was crying, I was crying, they were crying, and they decided something super crazy, who was, we're gonna buy a mobile home, we put that on the plot, and in 5 or 10 years, when we get more money, we will do the house. So they left the office, and suddenly my partner, Roger, who is like a Superman, he came to the office, and he gets so stunned too, and he asked me to call them and ask them to give us a weekend to redefine the house. What happened during the weekend was that a common house changed from common systems, multi-purpose systems, multi-profiles of workers, traditional, to a house built just by one person. That's the key. This house, also the installation systems, is designed to be placed by the typical masonry, the typical builder, okay? Just with the bricks from the factory, from the village, from the neighbor village. Just with the builder from the other village. Everything available in terms of geography, and just one profile of worker, okay? That means to do detailed plans of bricks, of pure bricks, 1/5 scale. because as there's no coating, there's nothing to hide the bricks. And the bricks are as cheap as you can imagine. Then you have to be more than precise if you want at least to have a minimum of quality, okay? So that's how we discover our look, our basic concepts, because suddenly we discovered that asking the structure to perform in more ways than the topicals, than the typics, then you get less budget, okay? So, and that's why that facade, which obviously is ugly, but is a little bit less ugly that without any coating, we take the decisions to change the position of the brick, to transform the facade into a ventilated facade, just placing the brick in vertical position, okay? So this house is the result of this house is the example about how at least is our case, how we deal with a crisis, okay? Of course, it's a house with certain level of luxuries, because it's not as cheap as you can imagine. It's really cheap, but it's not the cheaper house in the world. But it has no heating system, but it doesn't need, because it has 12 centimeters of insulation. It has no heating system, but it has a recuperator. It has a lot of things, but in terms of climate, it's perfect. It has a lot of inertia. So it's nice house to live. They are so happy, and there's no foundations. There's nothing else than the minimum. Okay. There's no doors. There's no doors because it's not really necessary to have a lot of doors to separate spaces. So it's a minimum. To show the bricks like this in a minimum of look, you have to really be there all the time with the workers, deciding where. Because this is the cheapest brick in Spanish market. Well, and the last example of that, this is a very new house that we finished with a different material. This is a concrete house, but it's not a common concrete house. This was a very beautiful example. This is a beautiful plot in a place called Ullastret in the Costa Brava, a beautiful village, old town, that kind of beautiful look. It's like La Provence, but in a Catalan version, which is better. The beautiful story of that is that the plot was beautiful. The plot just have one reference, which was a wall, a stone wall that surrounds the plot, and it was the clear condition of the place. But when we went to the city council, they call us, they ask us to demolish the wall because they need the street a little bit wider because the cars couldn't do the corner. So per law, because it was on the council plans, the street has to get wider, so the wall has to be demolished. So we cry again, but we get the strategy through that. This house consists in demolish the wall, but with the old stones of the wall, everything is done. The new concrete is not a typical reinforced concrete. It's a concrete without any steel inside because it's full of huge stones. The old stones of the wall became the new wall mixed with cement. But not a common cement, but it's limestone cement. You know lime? So the lime cannot be mixed with steel because it doesn't mix well. So it's a wall that just works as a compression, as pure compression. Don't do it at your houses, please. It's dangerous. It couldn't be done for more than one floor, okay? It's just one floor house. So after the process, we just, I don't know the name, but you can see for the image what we did to show again the old stones, which was, is a monocomponent wall, okay? So it's like a cave. You have to, it's a weekend house. It's not a first house. So, because you have to move from the courtyard to go to the bedrooms, or you have to go crossing the bedrooms to go to the, so it's really a summer house. It's like a porch. It's a pure porch with old stones in your back, okay? It's, well, I have to say that it's the best place I've ever been. To be invited by that, well, I know my experience is not very large, but to be invited by that people who are happy here and they want to invite you to have a barbecue and to, yeah, the feeling of the stone and the temperature based on that very natural systems. In terms of comfort, I've never been in another place like this. It's really, really strict, it's really austere, it's like, it's as basic as the other one, but that material taking the color of the place, because the stone is of the place. The sand that we mix with the lime is also from the plot. So the color is the color of the plot. You see, there were stones enough also to do this pavement, so. Well, and just to end, sorry, because maybe it's too much. Just the last project. That concept of the nature of the building. When I've been talking about from elemental to fundamental, it's only possible if you ask, when you're asking something to perform, you have to ask to perform in the nature of the product. You cannot ask to be a structure and inertia and geometry to a piece of polycarbonate. You can ask that to a brick, because a brick, in its nature, all these performing roles are possible, okay? So in the nature of the products, we can find out that strategy of performing. But the buildings itself, in its nature, by the program, by I don't know what, has to make natural the perform of people. So what I was at the end, I'm trying to end my presentation coming to the first concept, which is that we're just designing support for living, not living itself. But we have to design conditions that sometimes are not visible conditions, but strong enough to give conditions for a good living. This is a residence that we've done for students in the place where we teach, which is not simple, because it was a competition. We did the competition in front of some colleagues of the school. We won the competition, and some of our students are living in the residence. So it's sometimes when you cross with some other colleague in the corridor, but at the end it's been everything all right. So the students are happy, and the colleagues are not unhappy, not very, very unhappy. Okay, so this is also about not only the nature of the products or the material, but the nature of the building, how the building performs. We won the competition explaining that we were the team who placed largest number of bedrooms in the residence. And we did that because in the basis of the competition, they were asking us for a studio, for a student's room, a gym, a coffee shop, a coffee place, okay, and something else. And we did nothing of that, just bedrooms, full of bedrooms. This is something that the jury really liked, because one of the jury members was the constructor and the manager of the building. So as larger number of bedrooms, larger benefit, okay? But why we did that? Not because we are so bad people, we are good people. But because in front of the building, there were a school of architecture with studios that open all the night long and with cafeteria. What sense have to repeat in smaller that program? So this is based on a symbiotic relation between the residents and the architectural school, okay? Not only because of the program, but also because of the energy. Our school has a huge boiling system for the heating system. And when you need the heating system in the school, in the morning, no? It's when the school is basically used. But in the residence, you need the heating system at night. So our competition said that we won't place any heating system in the new residence, that we will use the heating system of the school at night, okay? It sounds really simple. It doesn't sound really smart. It was 1 year of lawyers arguing with the university because in terms of heritage and property, it was not clear that the students' residents can use the property of the school. But at the end, we succeed. Okay? And also water, because we want lots of green in our house, in our students, in our dwelling, and the school has a huge surface of rainproof roof, but the water doesn't, it was useless, so we get all that, we propose to get all the rainwater for our building. So this is about the nature of that building, in terms of performing, in terms of energy, in terms of problem. In terms of section, we did that building, and we won also because there were not elevator. And there were not elevator because we used the section to give the chance to the handicapped people to get to the second floor without any kind of elevator system. So it was the poorest, the austere, the more simple proposal in the competition. But at the end, it's not necessary to come into the detail of the project. But at the end, this is the result, okay? As poor, as sad, as strong, as sharp as this, okay? Because this is our process. Construction process is like this, as heavy as this, okay? But we designed conditions. We designed how to manage rainwater. We designed how to manage sun incidents. We designed the size of that courtyard. We designed everything. So we designing conditions. So we also designing this. And now, this is what is happening. Because we're just taking decisions till that part. But the building history doesn't stop. And in the nature of the geometry of the courtyard is included the genesis of that garden that now is gorgeous. Okay. Inside, the space was as austere as outside, as poor as outside. But again, it's just a group of conditions. Conditions in terms of geometry, conditions in terms of temperature. But it's not life itself. The life comes with the students. And in this case, are architectural students. So it's supposed that they have some skills to colonize the space. So we won the competition just with that proposal. An empty space, without walls, without anything, just one kitchen, one bathroom, and nothing else, with a system of furniture that the students can rent by paying a little bit more, and just proposing different ways that how the conditions of geometry and the windows and so on can admit lots of different roles, lots of different ways to program the space. But the space was like this. Even the kitchen has no doors, and the space have no doors. But the students give the final look, which, of course, my wife hates that pictures, but I love that. And I cannot show it to my mother because she began to talk about dust and dirtiness. But I think that this is the real image and what really gives certain level of charm, of interest, because it's real. It's as beautiful as life. And the same with the space. Okay. So this was our students. I don't know if they are very good architects, but in terms of jokes, they are brilliant. When we were at that point, they decided to call that building Guantanamo. You know Guantanamo, the American prison in Cuba? So, because it's really hard, okay? But again, it was just support and certain conditions for something that happened, and it has happened very fast, that kind of crapers colonize the whole facade, and now it's an incredibly beautiful green facade. So this is it. We are here just giving conditions, but assuming the whole process from the design to the life, to the real life. Okay? Thank you very much.
So, thank you, Josep. If you have any question, maybe if you do not have any course, you can stay with us and we carry on with a small discussion for 10 or 15 minutes. Is it okay?
Sure.
So, do you have any question? You can speak in Spanish if it's easier.
Or English or French.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I have a question about the concept of as found. Maybe you know this. It's from the Smithson. It's using raw materials, but also using raw process. And so you explain reasons of why you are doing this. But it looks like you also really like it. Like it's something you find beautiful. But in the same time, at the beginning, it was not something beautiful. So, why do you, at the beginning, why do you do that? Why did you do that?
Well, I've tried to explain that is basically that coincidence. So, it's a two-origin process. From the beginning, our interest for that kind of traditional process, material, construction, was in terms of aesthetics, because as is something without representative language, that kind of traditional construction was very easy to share, because it has no language. It's not about desire. So in time, we've came from just an aesthetic approach. Our first houses, we have different stuff without bricks, white houses, beautiful Mediterranean houses, that were our research by that moment was to understand what we have to do to make that a house look like an old-fashioned house. Just like that. It was about the proportion of the halls. It was about certain types of sun protections and about how the roof is relation with the facade and so on. But we were just dealing with that, doing research, deep research, but just in terms of aesthetics, okay? Then we discovered that the shape of that facades were based on a structural system. The facades has that proportions because we're structural walls. Okay, so we began to do facades as structural walls. Not using original bricks, using new bricks, because we were still on that aesthetic of the white facade. So the kind of brick was not interesting because we were just asking them to work structurally because that gives the reason of the aesthetic of the facade. Then we discovered that the structural systems are not just a structure, it's a system. Into a structural system of structural walls are included the idea of the opposite walls that helps the system to don't fall down. Then suddenly in the middle of the houses shown up certain kind of patio related with the staircase that is also a ventilation system. So suddenly we discovered that the structural wall is not a structural, is not just a structure, it's a system of programmation. So the program, not only the facade came after the system, also the program came after the system. The staircase in the middle, one public program one side, one intern program the other side. So we discovered that. Then, not only that, we discovered during that triangular brick house that the structure could given to you not only facade aesthetic reason, not only program reason, also behavior reason. I mean, the cross ventilation is a concept based in structural walls because you're designing halls. This is basic in a structural wall. So we came from an interest based on aesthetic, and through the research, we've been discovering that. When you come into the performing, in the idea of behavior, in the idea of inertia, cross-ventilation, and so on, then suddenly the brick became important too. It's impossible to get the old bricks. Sometimes when you're working in rehabilitation, in rehab, sometimes you can do that idea of harvest map to take advantage of the material which is already there. But I think that it's far more important to understand that a massive brick, it doesn't matter if it's old or if it's new, has a heat value very higher than a non-massive brick. That the dimension in terms of compression works better if it's thinner than if it's not thinner, and so on and so on. So it's a large process, but at the same time, the economic crisis that made us, give us the obligation to do that kind of house, cross with the other process. So material and system come together, okay? So it was a little bit like this.
No, it's good.
Of course, and I've forgotten to explain that as all the architects, I don't want to make any confusion about that. I'm not trying to say that this is the good or the only way to do architecture. This is the reason, this is based on that we are for certain circumstances, that we are Catalans, that we have the crisis, that we are interested in that reason based in material and construction and so on. But it doesn't mean, in one hand, that is the only way, and it doesn't mean that in all the stories that I've explained, there's not a lot of snob reasons just because of taste that is taken there. I'm not trying to, I don't want you to be any misunderstanding about that. This is not a mathematical process. This is the typical creative process with a lot of messy, with a lot of cross ideas, with a lot of mistakes, with a lot of coming back again, okay? But what we have clear for sure is that we are not interested in architecture as an object. We are interested in architecture as a performing system. But the process is as difficult as I'm sure that is for you when you are at your studios.
Muchas gracias.
De nada.
Hello. I just have one question about the flexibility you have explained at the beginning, because you were speaking about the flexibility of spaces, but I don't understand why you were using concrete in many of your projects, because in time some constructors or just people would like to change the shapes or I don't know, to combine some spaces. So why you don't use wood or just movable walls? No. I don't know. So do you have a reason?
It's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting. Because I think that there's a misunderstanding about that. I think this is a possible way to understand what flexibility means. What I'm saying is, okay, I give you an example that I'm sure that in Paris and in every place you have the same guy. Can you imagine that kind of huge apartments in Barcelona? We have the Chample, no, in the middle of the city, that kind of apartments that give to one facade and another, with that kind of regular spaces just based in structural walls that has not a specific program. This is a way to understand flexibility. The flexibility is not about the size of the space. The flexibility is about to do what you want to do at any time. In Barcelona happened something very funny. That kind of apartments or flats that have two facades, to the street and to the inside part of the block, people in summer sleep in one facade, and at the middle of the year do a moving inside, all the people do that, and put the bedrooms on the other side of the apartment. This is just possible because of the conditions were able to be interpreted as the user want. This is the flexibility I'm talking about, which is that very, very typical, very, very common in that old-fashioned construction, but from Schinkel to the popular, which is that the spaces are very special because are high, are wide, has cross ventilation, has beautiful doors, has beautiful walls, but the program is not clear. So suddenly, a new generation take place on that apartment and decide that the kitchen gonna be in another place. Of course, that when we're talking of something very small, it's not so simple. It's not so simple. But the flexibility I'm talking about is that can assume concrete walls or brick walls if you have a system of halls which are not about functionalism, which are about that kind of flexibility, is as flexible as the Charlottenburg Palace, as the typical loft in the middle of Manhattan. Well, not Manhattan, but Queens. It's as flexible, it's the same level of flexibility. In one case, is the flexibility based on a series of spaces, different but not in terms of function, that you decide how you will roll, how will you perform, or the other, which is free space, and you decide, and the size is enough to assume from a concert to a bedroom. But, and this is a personal taste, as this system mix very well with what I've been talking about, the structure and the performing in terms of comfort and thermodynamic, I prefer that kind of flexibility. And I have to say something. And you can check, well, we came from an apartment with a big door, how you call that? Slide door. It was broken, the door, and it was open, because a slide door, it's always or closed or open, but it's never a door that, okay, today my mood is to be like this, and tomorrow my mood is to be like that. People is not like light MOOCs that you give, go that way, go that way. People, we are so complex. I love slide doors, but not in terms of changing the spaces. But this is very personal. I admit that there's other kind of flexibilities. What I'm trying to explain is how we understand flexibility in that kind of very strong and fixed spaces, okay? So it's that kind of classical flexibility that I'm sure that you can find out also in Paris in lots of buildings.
Okay, maybe I have a question. Oh, okay, I give you the microphone after. But just a question, because you shown us a lot of part of your work. What is very important is the energy flows and the thermodynamics, and so you have a very clear understanding of building physics. And so I know that the studies, architectural studies in Spain, are quite different than in the one in France. So could you explain us maybe how is organized your work within your office, and
we are very special.
And your relation maybe with, I don't know, environmental engineers or thermodynamics?
Well, our generation is far different than the generation that teach me at the school, okay? The previous generation of me, the problems or to deal with the sustainability was solved just with that sentence, which was, this is about common sense. My teachers told that to me. My teachers told that to me in a jury in a competition that I won. That all that ideas about sustainability, it's as easy as to talk in terms of common sense, cross-ventilation and something else, inertia. But the sun chimney that I've shown you, do you think that is possible without a parametric approach? Without a real, serious parametrical approach in terms of simulation, thermodynamics, and so on? It's absolutely impossible, because a sun chimney is the opposite of the common sense. It's absolutely the opposite. Who can imagine that a building can manage the comfort in terms of air, putting a greenhouse in a Mediterranean climate? It's against the common sense. So we have the sense and the sensibility, if you want, to introduce thermodynamical strategies in our projects. But for sure, from the very beginning, we need two very important consultancies. The structural consultancy, we have a very deep friend of us who is our structural consultancy, which is at the office by phone or sitting them from the very beginning of the competitions or of the houses, it doesn't matter, because we're all, of course that we get bored of our job. So every project we need a little bit of challenge more. So Now we're trying to deal with a de-wheeling of social housing with structural walls, but the walls will work like a huge beam because then I don't want need foundations and so on and so on. So from the beginning, in the strategy of the competition, we are introducing a structural approach. Okay, so it's not only that I assume that common sense or that common knowledge of the structural walls. It's also to get as maximum as possible from the idea of structural wall, or doesn't matter, a different kind of system, because I have shown some structures which are not based on walls. The other one, who is at the very beginning, is the energetic and environmental consultancy. Okay, we work with a group of people. They are architects, but they have specialized in energy simulation, material life cycling too. But we're not using this too much because suddenly he came to the office and said the concrete is not good enough. So I prefer to don't listen to that. So of course that you listen what you want. It's always the same. But we try to have them from the beginning because our strategies need concepts that we need to make stronger with them. And after the concepts, we need them to put it into the simulations. The second step is to introduce also the engineer of installations, because it's not the same. One engineers are helping us to do the calculation of the demand, how many heat, how many cold, how many cross ventilation we need, but then you need the engineer who who transformed that into real halls, into real windows, into real our architectural solutions that gives the final size, gives the final performing, and this needs the specific engineer. So these three characters shows from the very beginning on the process. We cannot afford that as people in the office, so we need that, and it's been the result of years, because as I've been talking before at the beginning about that problem that the air is something that society and architects in general we have forgotten, and we have let the engineers to solve that. It's not easy to find out that kind of engineers that don't want to solve the quality of the air with machines, which are far more easy, because the machines has a certified, has numbers very clear, made from labs, that gives you potons, kilowatts, and it's far more easy to solve the quality of the air based on norms with machines. You have to work harder if you want to solve the same just with natural systems or close to natural systems. And now we need a fourth guy, which is, because the three previous, which is the domotic, because as we don't have machines, but we need a lot of domotic. We need a lot of domotic, not only to control all that natural relations, but also to manage and to check, which is also a responsibility of the designers, which is, let's see what happened when the building is end. Let's see if the sun chimney is really working. Let's see if the de-wheeling is really not wasting energy, and so on. So the domotic is something that is getting importance in the process.
I have a question about the budget. Do you keep the same level of what we can name the economy of means and the aesthetic of ordinary elements? Also in a case of a project of with a high budget, with a higher budget?
Yeah, the budget was a circumstance that something, we're not a cheap projects office. We're not. We are dealing with that kind of material because we have a snob position on that. We really prefer the look of a material, of a product that hasn't been designed to be seen. You know what I mean? For us, it's far more beautiful a brick that has been built or has been produced to be coated than a brick that has been produced to be uncoated. This has two reasons. One is pure aesthetic, the aesthetic of the no designed things. The other is performatic, because a brick which has been built to to be coated has more porous, then in terms of humidity control works better. It's not protected in front of the rain, so the color is beautiful. It's more irregular, so then gives you the sense of pure construction. So it's a very subjective position, not based on budget. In fact, of course that product is cheap, but as we are trying, as good constructor that we are, to avoid any kind of thermal breach, to design stuff that works by its own, at the end, there's lots of design decisions that make that our construction process is expensive. The products are cheap, but the construction process is expensive because it's craft work. And there's another positive point on that. In my opinion, there's a memory when you see the construction as a final, when you see the process as the final aesthetic, then your house, your equipment, your facility is giving you a present, which is the memory of the construction. People, and that's why with my lectures or with my presentations, when I explain houses or ideas, I try to explain tales to avoid that anybody gets left. Because people love tales. We love tales. And a house or a building can explain you a tale or can explain you nothing. So we prefer the tale. And to show the process is a tale. To show products is not a tale. To show products is just a mezzanine. It's just an addition. To show products is an addition. To show how perform the structure and what is based the structure and the products that in addition gives you the sense of structure is the story of a process. Then you get that sense of tale. I always explain the same. Our buildings doesn't smell like a new car. Do you like how it smells a new car? Well, somebody told me one day that yes, if it's a Porsche one, but in general I don't like how it smells. The idea of new as a smell is awful. And in a house it's terrible. So to have the smell of the construction is not a good smell, but at least have sense. And I think it's another advantage of that. But I insist, we are not cheap. We try to, because our commissions ask, but everybody has to have a cheap house. It doesn't matter if he's rich or not. But the houses that we've done is for rich people. Lots of them. Well, not this, I'm sorry. Well, this is for not rich people. Well, it doesn't matter. We do a lot of expensive stuff. I won't show you more stuff because it could be tiring. Something else?
Est-ce que vous avez d'autres questions encore? Ouais, Paul.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a question about the electrical energy. So you're talking a lot about the wind, the natural ventilation, and so on. But what about the electrical creation or usage in your building? Or
Yeah.
you base it also on the
Yeah.
aspect?
Yeah. Okay, I tell you our position today, which is changing because all that stuff is changing. Well, what is happening now in Europe, not only in Spain, but in Europe in general, is that just by doing what the norms and rules are asking us to do in terms of insulation, hermeticity, thermal bridges and so on, just doing what the European norms are asking to do, our houses, our facilities, the waste in terms of energy based on climate was like this, and the hot water was like this. But now, by following the norms, it changed to that, okay? So 10 years ago, our basic dealing, what we were concerned about in terms of energy was to avoid the waste of energy in terms of climate conditions. Now, this has changed, but completely. Now, the big problem is how we produce hot water for the houses, okay? Obviously, in the facilities, it's not the same because it depends on the program. But in terms of and you have to assume that the 90% of the construction is housing, okay? So now the problem or the point on that reflection is about in this point, okay? Climate is not as important as used to be. And we get that advantage through two strategies: insulation, hermeticity, ventilation, control ventilation, and of course efficiency in production. Because if you produce energy with a heat bump, an aerothermal heat bump, from 1 kilowatt of electricity, you get 4 kilowatts of heating or freezing. So, thanks to the efficiency of the machines and thanks to the insulation, this is like this. So now the point is how we produce that. So, nowadays, the conclusion for us, it's not a beautiful conclusion, is that we can come back to not renewable energies for climate, because this will be like this, if we produce our hot water with sun energy. Okay? You know what I mean? So this is our point now. We're not doing this in our projects because I don't like very much the certain machines to get that point. But it should be like this, at least in Spain, that we have a lot of sun. Okay, so as we have a lot of sun, the interest point now in Spain is to produce our hot water by sun. The climate is not so important, okay? But in our case, what we're trying to do a lot is, of course, the passives and the use and so on and so on and so on. But we're trying now is that the primary air for renovation comes, instead of using recuperation machines, we're trying to get the primary air for the renovation from Atriums. Okay, this is one saving system because, well, this is I suppose that you know the passive concept. The basic passive energy concept is based on a lot of insulation, a complete surrounding of insulation, no thermal breach, a high level of hermeticity. Then you're not losing heat. So, as you have to renovate the air, do the renovation through a recuperator. Okay, that's the passive concept. This in Spain has not much sense because 70% of the hours, the air of the street is in good conditions. So to imagine a concept of housing based on to be so closed is really a no sense. So, but the law asked us to do that. So that's why we've changed the machine, the recuperator, for the Atrium. Okay, that's the first strategy. And the second is to put once upon a time the air, the fresh but warm air, comes from the Atrium, across the spaces, and goes out in not good conditions. Instead of recuperator, what we do, especially in winter time, is to put all that hot, because it's hot because it comes from the inside, we push all that hot air to the aerothermal system, because as you know, the aerothermal systems works in between taking certain heat from the air. So if the air outside is 5 degrees and you put there the hot air that comes from inside, then you increase the temperature and then the BAM is more efficient. Well, we're more or less we are in that point, okay?
D'autres questions? J'en avais une, mais which tools do you use to assume your sickness control, your control sickness? Because are you drawing?
Yeah. Well,
you do models?
Right now,
at the office.
Yeah, the office. I remember when we were students, Croquis magazine, which was about Jean Nouvel. And Jean Nouvel said something like, to be architect, I have to sleep a lot, something like that, and chat, and chat. So to talk and to talk and to talk. So I don't know if it's true, but I remember that expression, that to design by talking. Our basic tool design is the chat, the personal chat with the partners, but not only with the partners, because we are the four together in certain moments of the process, asking each other, doing some meetings, but during the whole process, nowadays we are like handicapped. I'm 44, so nowadays I'm the one of the four partners who better draw by AutoCAD. And now I'm doing my own house and I'm drawing it myself. But in general, our office process is that we are handicapped and we have people that are dealing with the project all the time. So the chat, when it's not with the partner, is with the people. Okay, so the office is like 4 or 6 people dealing with a project, and we are like this, and now we are more people than chairs in the office. So it's like, it's very funny because I have to move from one place to the other, moving my own chair, because we are really short of chairs. So chat is the first tool. So, but why? It's not just in a poetic or a beautiful idea. Projection is not a linear process. Projection is a messy process with cross ideas and so on. Just by talking, and that's what I used to understood the beautiful of the Nouvelle concept, is just by talking, you obligate yourself to put in order the ideas. Maybe you are in a mistake, you will discover, because we are really hard workers. We never give an okay at the first decision. It's always to check. Then talking, to put in order ideas, check by AutoCAD, by basically now we are checking with that kind of huge models, 120, that are the way to check basically the structure and geometry, not the material. To understand the performance of the material, we take the simulations and we began to deal and to chat, but with the engineers. Okay, let's chat. Yesterday I got a 4-hour, but what you have to imagine is that it's 4 hours meetings. I remember one friend of me who teach with me at the university, his wife works at Nike. She's a high executive at Nike. Nike Spain decided that the meetings, to become productive, they decided that the meetings at Nike Spain gonna be stand up. So the meetings are not seated. I don't know now, but I'm talking about 5 or 7 years ago. They decided that the meetings should be to be fast and to be productive. Okay. By that moment, I said, "Oh, what a clear idea! This is so smart." I discovered that, or they are taking different decisions than me, that it should be possible, or they were in a mistake, because we need 4 hours meetings, talking in a circle about thermodynamical concepts. Yesterday we were talking about a courtyard in a public dwelling, about the primary, if it works like this, or it will work in the other direction, or the natural engine, and so on and so on. So the meeting is the basic tool. In terms of control, the whole process that we do is a checking process. It's a checking process because the ideas are cheap. The ideas are, I always say the same about our office. I don't know if we are good or if we are talented, but we are self-confident. It's far more important to be self-confident, to have the ambition to defend what not your ideas, because the ideas is the less important part of the process. The ideas is like to be alive. Everybody, my father has ideas. It's not a big difference between all the people has ideas. If not, we're gonna be dead. The important part for the architect is to have that self-confidence to after a very hard process, to be so sure about that, and to defend that in front of the client, and to defend that in front of the wall, and to defend that in front of the constructor, and so on, and so on, and so on. So all our process is not about ideas, it's about the checking, it's about control. So it doesn't end with the meetings in the design process. Our control in the construction process is also large meetings. Large meetings. The constructors hate us, but really hates us. But you cannot imagine how they hate us. Because they never believe how very well detailed is the project. They give budgets just by the square meter. It doesn't. I finished a project for a house which the pure description of the parts to make the budget is 80 pages. It's like a book. It's a house. The constructor doesn't matter. He just gives a price. But he will discover during the process of construction that everything is well defined, and I will be there to control that everything is done as I want. Then happen what it happens, that our architecture, without people, without real life, is boring because it's over-controlled. And is too much, well, it's too heavy, it's too strong, because we want to control everything, so we put the less parts of the construction, the easiest is to control that. So without greenery, without people living, it's just as strong as it looks. What we were sick, what we are sick, what we really have to change is not that kind of sickness of control, because this is like to be crazy. You cannot change that. But we can change, what we really can change is our addiction to visual perception. What could be changed. I've been talking about before, about the air and so on. And this is not a problem of the architecture. Our society is based in the visual perception. Why? Because it's the fastest. I don't know if you've seen that, but the MIT in the 70s or the 80s, they did a lab test, and it's very easy. You can do it by your own. Is to give you a decimal part of second of a song and a decimal part of second of the face of who sings. Okay? It's a part of time. Décima de segundo. Well, very short part of time. Very short part of time of a song, and the same time for the face of the singer. Okay? Everybody see the singer, nobody get the song. Nobody. See, your ear need a little bit more. But everybody knows that the smell is the perception system that really reminds you an experience of when your childhood and so on. All of us, we know the powerful of the smell, the powerful of the ear, but at the end, we are addicted to a visual perceptive system. Okay? It wouldn't be important if the reality. Have you read that beautiful book, The Eyes of the Skin, of Julie Palasma? You use that book? Well, Julie Palasma is a Finnish architect. He has that couple of books. The first one is The Eyes of the Skin. And he talks about the perception of any human being. Doesn't matter if he's an architect, a designer, or a cooker. It's the same. It's an haptic system. We get an instant image of comfort or discomfort based in all our perceptive systems. So why we give so much importance to the visual perception system? Then, what's the sickness of that? What's the result of that sickness? That we design sculptures, not buildings. Because the buildings are too much complex to just synthesize in one image. So we not only need that idea, we also need tools to introduce non-visual perceptive systems in our projects, which are simulations, which are chatting, talking, have a beer with your friend, and so on. You can also design in a bar.
D'autres questions pour Josep ou,
Okay, thank you.
Merci beaucoup.